Welcome back. I'm Linda Kincaid. Turning to the US presidential race, an already surging Democratic ticket is riding a new wave of momentum. Vice President Kamala Harris is showing gains among likely voters in the key battleground states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The poll from the New York Times and Siena College shows a tight presidential race overall with no clear leader. The former president won't be on the campaign trail today, but he will sit down later for an interview with Tesla CEO Elon Musk on his platform X. Meantime, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy told Fox News that Trump has to stop talking about crowd size and start focusing on the vice president's positions on issues like immigration and fracking. Well, CNN's ISACC DOVERE joins us now from Washington with more. Good to have you with us, ISACC. So overall, the polls show that it's going to be tight at this point in time between Trump and Harris, but the Democrats are really surging ahead compared to when Biden was on the ticket, now that Harris is top of the ticket, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Look, we're 3 weeks into Kamala Harris running for president here, so the race has changed very rapidly. But in that time, certainly the polls are in a different place. We'll see how that holds as we go into the Democratic convention next week, and then everything after Labor Day when things will really start ramping up in a full way.
And of course, Kamala Harris is set to roll out her economic policy soon, and we are hearing that Trump's team have just announced the largest ad spend of this campaign, $37 million, most of it to be spent here in the swing state of Georgia.
Yeah, and that's revealing in itself, right? Georgia was a state that Joe Biden won narrowly in 2020, but that for weeks, long before that debate performance, really for months, Democrats had been saying Georgia was not going to be competitive this time around. That the Trump campaign feels that they need to spend money there, and that much money is an indication that the race is in a different place for real, and not just a couple of polls showing that they see that and that they feel like they need to try to stabilize and hold on to Georgia. Whereas if Harris can win Georgia, it makes it much harder for Donald Trump to put together the path to 270 electoral votes that he would need to win.
Exactly. A key state. ISACC DOVERE, good to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, Donald Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, are looking to swing the election momentum back in their direction. One of the first ways is Trump is returning to the platform X, formerly known as Twitter. Several phrases referring to Donald Trump have been trending, including Trump is back and Trump on X. The former president posted a message promoting an interview in the coming hours with X owner Elon Musk. Joining us now for more on all of this is CNN's TREENE. So let's start with that, because Elon Musk is going to speak to Trump on his platform in the coming hours, and for the first time Trump has posted on that platform. What can we expect?
Well, first of all, I think him rejoining X was a long time coming. If you talk to Donald Trump's allies, and honestly, people more so outside of the campaign, they have been pushing for him to rejoin the social media platform for months. They believe that it is in his best interest to be able to speak to a larger crowd, to amplify his message. However, that has not always been the same desire, I guess I should say, with the campaign itself. They have been hesitant to have him rejoin X because a lot of the times you see Donald Trump share conspiracy theories. We saw him share some over the weekend about Harris's crowd size. He has more outlandish takes that he puts on Truth Social, and they kind of have liked allowing that to stay there, where it doesn't get as much coverage and as many people are not on Truth Social as they are on X. The other part of it, of course, as well, is that Donald Trump has a stake in Truth Social, and for business reasons, he's supposed to be putting more of his content out on that website. But that is changing now, and part of that is because we are so close to the election, and they want him to be amplifying his message and emphasizing that to as many people as he can in, this sprint to November. Now, as for this interview with Elon Musk, it's going to be really interesting to watch. Donald Trump has really been kind of enamored with Elon Musk for a long time, but especially in the past few weeks. We know that Musk had endorsed Donald Trump in the aftermath of the attempted assassination of the former president in Pennsylvania. And ever since then, you can hear it when you go to Donald Trump's rallies like I do. You hear it in his speeches. He talks about their relationship. He says he talks with him personally. And I think this is a way for him, it's a comfortable interview. It'll be more of a friendly interview, but a good way for him to kind of reintroduce himself to the world of X, formerly known as Twitter.
We'll see how that plays out. But I have to ask you as well about the other conspiracy theories we are hearing from Donald Trump with regards to crowd sizes, something that he is quite obsessed with. He claims that Kamala Harris's crowd sizes are created using artificial intelligence. Has he provided any evidence for that?
He hasn't, and I mean, it's just false. It's a wildly out there conspiracy theory, to be frank. And it's one that, Donald Trump didn't come up with this on his own. He actually, this is a far-right conspiracy that he saw and bought into and then amplified himself on his own social media. But there's no basis for this. I mean, hundreds, if not thousands of people were at that rally, but a lot of people in the media as well were there, including CNN, who witnessed the crowd. We have our own video, people shot at CNN who were at that rally. It's just completely false, but it does speak to, I think, the broader the broader frustration that I've been hearing from Donald Trump's team about how the former president is feeling, particularly when it does come to crowd size. It's no secret that Donald Trump has long been obsessed with crowd size, even back when he was running in the lead up to 2016. And I mean, for a long time, it's something that he took pride in. I mean, he still takes pride in it, but for a long time, he was the only one who could really turn out those massive numbers. You looked at Joe Biden's campaign, they were not bringing in thousands and thousands of people to his events, but that is changed with Harris now at the top of the ticket, and it's really gotten under Donald Trump's skin. It is frustrating him. You've heard him mention this and talk about it at a number of his rallies ever since Biden ended his campaign and Harris became the successor and the presumptive Democratic nominee. And so that's where I think a lot of this is coming from. And I can tell you, it's definitely not something that I think a lot of Republicans are happy with. We heard some of his allies, including the former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, go on Fox News this morning and say he should not be talking about crowd size. He needs to be talking about the issues.
Exactly. We'll see if he heeds that advice. ALAYNA, TREENE, good to have you with us. Thanks.